It's great to welcome back to the program after too long of a hiatus, Scott Barry Kaufman, who's a humanistic psychologist exploring the depths of human potential. He's author of the book Transcend, The New Science of Self-Actualization. It's great to have you back on.
Thanks. It's great to talk to you again. That was a fun one last time.
So let's. I have a feeling this one will also be. So two words in the title of your book, which we should just directly get into because they can mean different things to different people. Transcendence, first of all, and self-actualization. What do you mean in your use of those words? What is self-actualization, and what are we looking to transcend?
Two woo-woo words, right?
Right.
And here I am. I'm a scientist. I think there's. I just want to start off with that. Say I think there can be a lot of wisdom in the woo-woo, but I've been trying to scientifically put this on a foundation that's grounded in as much evidence as possible. So Abraham Maslow, the humanistic psychologist, who really was a big inspiration for me in writing this book, viewed self-actualization as whatever that unique part of you that really makes you come alive, that makes you creative, that really shows the world and that you truly existed. When you were here on this planet. Transcendence, which is something that Maslow, towards the later years of his life, really felt was missing from his hierarchy of needs. He saw it as a great connectedness to others, being at one with your values, but these what he called the B values, the values of being itself. So values which are no longer means to another end. You've transcended having values that are perhaps selfishly oriented, but really get outside of yourself.
Is your sense that as you have worked in this field now for some time, and you, of course, are familiar with the history of it and where the field is now, is your sense that there will ever really be an achievement of what a lot of these processes point to, or is it more this idea that the journey really is the process and there is no endpoint at which we say self-actualization has now happened and we're done. Transcendence has happened and we're done.
Oh gosh, what a boring life that would be if you reach transcendence and then you were done.
Right.
Watch Netflix, binge watch Cobra Kai the rest of your life?
I guess, yeah.
No, I'm all about the process, really. And I actually define the process of becoming a whole person a never-ending process. It's a process of integration. There's constantly things we have to integrate. We are integrating various warring factions within ourselves, but it's a never-ending process integrating warring factions outside of ourselves as well. I mean, we have various viewpoints, and other people have various viewpoints, and these days everyone wants to rip their head off. That having this sense of a North Star of self-actualization, or having a North Star of transcendence, means that you're always moving towards. It's like, you're never gonna. You can see the moon. You can try to walk towards the moon. You're never gonna walk to the moon. I mean, maybe someday we'll be able to get to the moon by other means. But just having that self-actualization or transcendence as this moon that you always see in front of you, and that you're working towards, I think is a great North Star to have, but it doesn't make any sense that you're going to actually achieve it.
One of the things that's common in philosophy and reading the theory of different philosophers, this doesn't apply to all, but it applies to many. It's the idea that a particular philosophical approach to life is almost like a grand theory, in the sense that it is the explanation for how things came to be the way they are, or how humans should interact with the world, or it purports to be a sort of self-contained package that tells you not everything you need to know in a literal sense, but in terms of an approach to living, covers a lot of the ground. It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have a sort of different approach, that there is no such one prescription, so to speak.
That's right. I mean, I cringe, quite frankly, when I see a lot of things in the self-development space, and I cringe for one reason: they're so out of touch with science and the actual evidence. You might have some hyper narcissistic gurus or something who or people who are trying to sell a product who, because they thought of it, then they're like, oh, it's brilliant. but the way science works is that I had so many ideas in grad school, for instance, that I woke up in the middle of the night, I'm brilliant, it's brilliant, and I presented it to my advisor and I got a reality check. It was like, actually, that's doesn't make any damn sense. So being a scientist means you need that humility, right? And so I think that the best way forward is to understand that there are individual differences. I've studied personality science, and you realize that people are on different paths of self-actualization. We need to be as accepting as we can of other people's, this might sound a little woo-woo, but sacred journey. There's a sacred aspect to each person. That's what Maslow was trying to get at with self-actualization. He said, we don't try to change roses into lilies. We try to make a rose into a good rose. And, I think that's really the philosophy behind this, is that you need to find out what works for you. You need to find out what path fits your unique constitution, your unique talents, your unique strengths, your unique personality. What you see these days is there are a lot of people who are trying to tell other people how they should live their life. And it's really, truly unfortunate.
I want to get to how much of this is about the individual, but how much of it is the context in which the individual lives, meaning society on planet Earth at a particular point in time. But to open that conversation, we hear a lot about, social media makes people less happy because you're constantly comparing your life to the lives of others. Technology, shorter attentions, there's this idea that things are really bad right now in terms of happiness because of particular characteristics about society today. How would you answer the question of whether people on balance are less happy today than they were at some point in the past?
Well, if you look at every generation, no one is ever happy. In the history of the human species, there's always been there's been obviously prosperous times, and there's been droughts. There's been horrible times. Right now, we're going through a historic moment right now, which 500 years from now they'll probably talk about as a really difficult time. But it is part of human nature to never be content, to never be satisfied, to always strive for more, to always be unsatisfied with the attainment of our basic needs. Now, there are few people who really can cultivate a really deep mindfulness practice, who cultivate a really a practice where they're seeking wisdom, and the wisdom they are seeking is that enoughness. But I do think it's part of human nature. Every generation, you have people complaining. It's not like it's that unique. There's some people had argued that this is the narcissistic generation. But then there's some criticism that came out. Well, actually, every generation of it's just kids are narcissistic. Like, unless you eradicate from the gene pool, youth, you're not going to eradicate narcissism to a large degree. There's certain things that are reoccurring because they're part of human nature.
What do you make of not what do you make of, but how should the average person who's trying to figure out their path deal with the very present conflicts that exist between different philosophies and ideas? So just like one example, the mindfulness movement has become very en vogue over the last 10 to 15 years. And meditation as part of the path to self-actualization and transcendence is something that many people are talking about. On the other hand, if you look at the ancient Stoic philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and others, they are not so big necessarily on meditation in the sense of clearing the mind and sort of focusing on breathing and the like. And they have a different approach about sort of the practical steps that someone might take to solve some of the issues that we might look to meditation for help with. It seems to be sort of a conflict, at least to some degree. How can the average person navigate, with that as one example, and of course hundreds of others, the conflicts between these different ideas about how to live presently and transcend, for lack of a better term?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it goes back to your earlier question about is there one way to live a good life? I taught at Columbia. I taught this course, The Science of Living Well, and I had a whole history lecture where I go through in depth different conceptualizations of what the good life entails throughout the course of human history. And my goal for my students is to see what resonates with them the most. I mean, you have the Ryan Holidays. I love that guy. I talk. He's been on my podcast a lot of times, and he's gung ho about the Stoics, right? But that doesn't mean that everyone has to be as gung ho about the Stoics. Some people might resonate more with some of the things the Buddha said. Some people might resonate more with what David Pakman says. You really have to open up the space that no one discovered the ultimate truth that works for everyone in all of humanity. No one. The Stoics didn't, certainly. Now, what could be an interesting question is which philosophy is closest to the science, is closest to actually what the science shows is most likely to lead to a good life. That's a reasonable question.
And what's the answer to that one?
Oh boy, I've never answered that in public before, because I'm very wary of in some sort of fight saying there's the winner, bing bing bing. But I think that the science shows that there are grains of truth in all of them. I know that might sound like a bit of a cop-out answer, but
it does.
It does, I know, right? But you have to mix and match, so if I was, well, actually that's what I tried to do in my book Transcend, to be honest, is I didn't pit it to a particular ancient philosophy. I tried to present a integrated framework of what all the science looks like. So my preferred approach is science. My preferred approach is to take what we know about science and put together into an integrated scientific framework, as opposed to a philosophical framework that's untested. Now, that might be fighting words to some philosophers, but I'm not a philosopher. I'm a psychologist.
There are people who will no doubt listen to this conversation and they'll say, guys, you're missing the boat. This is not about Maslow. This is not about Stoicism. There is no way that anybody can really self-actualize and transcend unless we deal with the structural problems in society. When we have, some people might point to neoliberalism, others will point to capitalism, some will point to the military-industrial complex or inequality, and they will say, what you're doing is like a retail strategy, but unless you do the wholesale first, you're not going to get there. What would you say to that argument?
Well, I think it's funny that you use the word boat, because that's my new hierarchy of needs metaphor, is a sailboat. So I very much take into account and appreciate the fact that we can't have too many holes in our boat, or we can't have too much insecurity or too much stressors on the boat itself, or else we're not going to go anywhere. But I also try to point to the fact that we must not neglect our higher possibilities either. So this is very much in the spirit of what Maslow talked about, and I'm really trying to bring back a lot of these ideas and make the argument that we need to work on both. We need to work on security, and we also need to work on growth. If you get too stuck in talking about insecurity and safe spaces and systemic all these things, which are fair enough, but if we talk too much about it, we can start to neglect and forget that there's still beauty in the world. We can start to forget that there's still opportunities, no matter how dire your current circumstances are. There are still opportunities for meaning making. There are opportunities for connection. In fact, if you get too caught up in what Maslow called the deficiency realm of human existence and neglect the be realm, or the being realm, the growth realm, you actually start neglecting all these amazing opportunities for connection that may exist, because you're so focused on grievances. That
actually strikes me a little as maybe one of the aspects of Stoic philosophy that really applies, which is thinking about the dichotomy, or really the trichotomy of control, which is, while certainly it is true that some of these systemic factors impact our lives on a day-to-day basis, our ability to influence them is dramatically more limited than our mindset, our goals, etc. And so that would be a very pragmatic approach to distinguishing the two.
I would love for you to unpack that a little bit more.
Well, in the sense that for example, if we believe that we are not as happy as we could be, both because we have set goals for ourselves that are counterproductive and make us less happy, and because of inequality at the broad economic level. Our ability to impact the latter is far more limited. I mean, certainly we can say, I want to be the best activist I can so that our elected officials reduce income inequality. But ultimately, the ability of one person to influence that is relatively limited. Our ability to say, I'm going to set different goals for myself in my life, that is something we control entirely and can immediately use potentially to improve our level of satisfaction.
So that's a great point, and I would say that's, you link that to Stoicism. I would also say that's quite in common with a lot of the others as well. So maybe the ones that you keep cropping up over and again in different philosophies, we start to get at the truth, the generalizable truth. I would say that's a very core part of humanistic psychology as well. I do think that change does start from within, and that is a big part of the book, is talking about getting your ship in order in a lot of ways. And that includes self-esteem. That includes having a healthy sense of self-worth that doesn't constantly need validation from others. I wrote an article for Scientific American on the latest social science of the victimhood mindset. And I try to put forward a better way in that article, a way that a better mindset that I think is, that clinical psychologists would rally around. Where we don't have experiential avoidance, but where we have a sense of exploration and curiosity and openness for the world. We can still absolutely fight for injustices, and there are real victims. But the victimhood identity, that's something that I don't think people realize, especially if they've been socialized to think that that's the only way to live their life. I don't think a lot of people realize that there's actually you don't have to make it the core, essential, main overriding part of your whole being.
One of the things that's so interesting to me about that is, on the political spectrum, there are certainly voices on the left that agree with you, but the American right has made a big deal out of let's stop the victimhood complex, let's stop all of this stuff, and meanwhile, they love and agree with Donald Trump's 4 years of saying he has been the most unfairly treated president in history. Yesterday at a rally, saying it's an incredible irony that at a rally yesterday, Trump said, "I've been treated worse than Abe Lincoln." Remember, Abe Lincoln was assassinated. I'm sure you remember. And the crowd goes wild cheering. And the incongruous nature of that has been very interesting to watch.
Well, I'll tell you what else has been interesting to watch with that phenomenon, because I've done a lot of research on narcissism, and that forms a big part of this book as well. There's a whole chapter on the difference between self-esteem and narcissism, because they're different. They're very different. They have different developmental pathways. They have different correlates. People with a healthy self-esteem, it tends to be an outgrowth or an outcome of real earned accomplishment and connection with others, being a valued social member of society. That's people with a healthy self-esteem. It comes as a result of that. Whereas narcissism is not something that's an emergent property. It's the driver. It's the thing that makes its will onto the world. People with a healthy self-esteem don't feel the need to assert their will and completely control and change the world. So there's so many levels of irony that I've watched unfold in this administration, which from a grandiose narcissism perspective has been I've been taking notes, because it's like, I've published papers on this topic, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing something that fits my data. Like, it validates my career of research on this.
Yeah, I think it will prove to be a treasure trove of data for study for psychologists, sociologists, mental health professionals of different kinds. It's really going to be a remarkable thing to study for some time. The book is Transcend: The New Science of Self-Actualization. We've been speaking with the book's author, Scott Barry Kaufman. Always great having you on, and I so appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, and next time let's talk about intelligence.
Yes.